To everyone, we're being recorded. So real quickly, as permitted by the Governor's Disaster Declaration of April 29th, 2022, the determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this committee to meet in person. To ensure transparent and open meeting as possible, we will post the meeting materials approximately 1 week in advance. We'll provide a recording of this meeting linked on our website, and we'll take all votes by roll call. Before we have staff call the roll, I want to note that we have a new member joining the committee since our last meeting. Josh Potter is the Director of Community Development from Romeoville. Josh, welcome. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself, sir? Or is Josh not with us?
I know,
doesn't seem to be with us.
Oh. Well, somebody could make up a story about Josh if they'd like. But if not, why don't we turn it over to the roll call? Staff?
Sure. There we go. So this meeting is being recorded. Please use the mute function when not speaking. This will help eliminate excessive background noise. You can use the mute button on your screen, or those on phone can press *6 to mute and unmute themselves. To members of the public, if you have a question during the meeting, please use the chat box, which staff will be monitoring. Additionally, if you wish to address the committee during the public comment agenda item, you can indicate your desire to do so in the chat box. And then for members of the committee, when making a motion, please include your name so staff can properly record it. This is all the announcements so far, but we can now go through the roll call. If the committee members could please unmute themselves at this time. So Chair Bob Tucker.
Here.
Kim Porter.
Here.
Adam Ballard. Dion Bowe. Peter Kretikos let us know that he won't be able to join today. Christy De Laurentiis. Joan Fox.
Here.
Kendra Freeman.
Here.
John Furr.
Here.
Veronica Gonzalez.
Here.
Kevin Kramer. Marissa Lewis.
Hey, here, just in time.
Thanks, Marissa. Tiffany McDowell.
Here.
Shannon McGee.
Here.
Michael Myers.
Here.
Josh Potter. Obayi Reed.
Here.
Thanks, Obayi. Caitlin Ritter.
Here.
Darnell Shields. Jennifer Tamman. Michael Horsting.
Here.
And Tara Orban.
Good morning, present.
Great, thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you, Austin. Appreciate that. And thank you, everybody, for being here. So we have a very full agenda in front of us today. Are there any agenda changes from anyone? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to the next item. We are lucky enough to once again have Executive Director Erin Ailman with us today. Erin, do you have a few words for us?
Yeah, sounds good. And I think my goal will be just for the committee's awareness to join as often as I can to provide some connections between all of our committees and our board here. So because this work is just so important to our agency. I wanted to make sure that you all were in the loop on a couple of things that were happening at our board and MPO policy committee meetings. So we have been working hard on the 2050 update here. So every 4 years, we're required to either produce a whole new plan that looks out to somewhere 30 plus years in the future, or update the plan that we have. So right now we are updating the 2050 plan, and we are anticipating approval in October. I don't want my screen just changed. You took this thing down. And so we will have a little bit of information here for you just to make sure that you're understanding of the process that we're going through and where we're at. So the On to 2050 plan, which is really the framing for the strategy and strategic vision of our committees here, is built on inclusive growth, resilience, and prioritized investment as being those key principles that the plan's recommendations are built on. The update will meet a federal requirement that we have here. So the purpose is to really look at the data that the underlying data that plan was built on, and really take inventory of where we're at. And I think we weren't anticipating a pandemic, but it has had some pretty impactful impacts on our socioeconomic forecast that we put forth in the 2050 plan, and also some of the population projections. So the team is updating those data sets. We are revising some of our information down, just as we did in 2040 plan when we went through the recession and we saw sort of slowed growth across our region here. So this spring, like I mentioned, we updated the socioeconomic forecast and the demographic and employment projections. It shows less job growth than we projected 4 years ago. There were also some significant shifts to our population projections. So we want to continue to refine our data that underlines that baseline plan as we move forward here. We also are required to look at the total federal transportation budget and the anticipated revenues that we expect to have from our region and what types of big projects we'll be able to build. As a result, we've confirmed that we will have budget over the next 30 years, if all continues on the same trends, to fund about 70 regionally significant projects across the region, about $84 billion. We presented this plan to the Transportation Committee last month, but the total dollar value of projects, and I recognize that it's hard to sort of put billions of dollars into context here, is about $485 billion of core revenues will be available for transportation infrastructure over the next 30 years here. And, as we look at that, we spend in our region about 96.5% of that on investing and maintaining and modernizing our existing system. And so the rest of that funding, about 3.5% of it, is what's looking towards building sort of new things or additional capacity, or looking at our transit system and understanding where that needs to be extended. So in that 3.5% bucket, you'll see things that are like the Red Line extension from 95th Street to 130th Street, or you'll see some of the Metro train enhancements and double tracking in places where they need to strategically enhance them. The 290 corridor and the Blue Line Forest Park branch are in there in that 3.5% bucket as well. So we've been also having stakeholder meetings across the region, engaging people on the process, on the plan, and sort of looking to the future. So as soon as we complete this, we really need to kick off that 2060 planning process, and that will really be our opportunity to say, okay, what are the new policies, or what are how do we need to change and pivot just based on where we've been? So I really look at this 2050 update as just that, like, where are we in this moment in time on our way to 2050? We also have a couple things going on that will help us take advantage of things in the new infrastructure bill here. So the federal infrastructure bill, the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, IIJA, or sometimes known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, devotes about $5 billion to states across the country to establish electric vehicle infrastructure charging. In Illinois here, we anticipate we'll get about $50 million for electric vehicle infrastructure charging. We have held an EV charging forum. We're really focused on how do we make sure that as these things come online, we're providing our communities with the opportunity to understand how they can best take advantage of this so that it happens equitably across our region as we build out new infrastructure, that we aren't sort of just letting the market drive these conversations and discussions. And I've been working really closely with Chicago and Cook County and actually all the counties across the region to get an understanding of what they're doing today and what they need assistance with moving forward here. We are also undertaking a regional transportation vulnerability assessment as well. So we're really looking at how our transportation system is vulnerable to extreme weather events and what we might want to do to build in new measures of projects to better prepare them for the future, to make sure that they can withstand some of the changes that we've seen over the past few years here as well. And this will help communities be prepared to, again, unlock additional resources through the infrastructure bill if we have these plans in place. I think just a couple other things I wanted to touch on here that are related to some of our other committees is that our transportation committee met last month and we talked about our strategic direction. We're going to be creating some smaller working groups around transportation issues that come out of that infrastructure bill. So Complete Streets and Safe Streets is going to be a working group that we'll have to look at active mobility. Again, there's lots of funding set asides and competitive opportunities with the infrastructure bill around safe streets and healthy streets. Again, to address congestion mitigation and technology innovations, we'll have a Transportation Technology Operations Coalition group convening, freight working group, again, thinking about sort of the freight impacts on our region and how we continue to advance and better coordinate freight movements across our region and mitigate some of the negative impacts. That group will be focused on that, and then a safety resource group, which has been convening already, but we will continue to convene them over the coming year. So again, each of these groups will have a Cmap staff dedicated to them, subject matter expert. And if you are interested in updates on any of the specific activities, we're happy to bring them to this committee. My last note for you this morning just is that, I wanted to make sure too that you all are aware, and some of you are just because you're on other committee meetings, but that we are kicking off this year a new ADA program as an agency to help our communities get into compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act and making sure that they are meeting the letter of the law here. We'll be investing $10 million over the next 10 years to provide training to help our communities through our technical assistance arm be able to do these plans locally, to be able to program their capital improvement dollars to help support ADA transition plans, and then building of the infrastructure that is required along with that. So we have a new ADA director. Her name is Linda Mastandria. She joins us from FEMA and had been doing this work. Similar work with FEMA and related to disaster recovery and ADA planning with communities. So we're excited to have her on board. Just a couple, those were just my notes this morning that I wanted to make sure that you knew of some of the bigger projects that we have ongoing that are related. Happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Erin. So not much going on. Are there any questions for Erin? All right. Well, thank you so much for that great update. Hearing none, we're going to move on to the next item. So a copy of the minutes from the March 28th meeting were included in the meeting packet. Are there any requested changes or corrections to the minutes? Okay, hearing none, can I get a motion and a second to approve, please?
Motion, so moved, Marissa Lewis.
Thank you, Marissa. Is there a second?
Second.
I think Jonathan slipped in there. Jonathan, thank you for that. Are there any questions on the motion? Hearing none, staff, can you please take the roll call?
Certainly. So again, if committee members could please unmute themselves at this time, we'll run through this fairly quickly. Bob Tucker.
Yes.
Kim Porter. Joan Fox.
I wasn't at the meeting. I abstained.
Kendra Freeman.
Yes. Yes.
John Furr.
Aye.
Veronica Gonzalez.
Aye.
Tiffany McDowell.
Aye.
Shannon McGee.
Aye.
Michael Myers.
Aye. Aye.
Obayi Reed.
Aye.
Caitlin Ritter.
I wasn't at the meeting, so I'll abstain.
Okay. Darnell Shields.
Aye.
Michael Horsting.
I'm ex officio member.
Thank you. And then Tara Orban is also ex officio. Is there anyone else who I might have missed? I tried to read only the names of people we knew were present.
So you didn't call me, but I made the motion, so I don't know if that's why you didn't call me.
Great. Thank you, Marissa.
Austin, Christy DeLaurentis. I joined the meeting just a couple minutes late, so I'm an aye for the approval of minutes.
Thank you, Christy. Anyone else? Thank you. The motion passes.
Great, thank you, Austin, and thank you, everyone. Well, we've got some good presentations coming up now. So our next item is feedback on Cmap strategic direction, approaches, and measures. And we'll start this off with a presentation, I think, with Alex and Ryan. Is that still the proposed schedule?
Yes, Alex should be able to present from here.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Thank you and good morning, everybody. My name is Alex Ensign. I'm the new Director of Strategic Alignment and Innovation, and Ryan Elke is here from the team to assist me if needed. So we got some really great feedback from the last meeting that we've been looking through and figuring out how to refine our strategic direction. And I really appreciate the discussion that informed that, and also the written feedback. And I was hoping today that we could actually dive into a little bit more of some specific approaches that you had given a lot of good written feedback on, but weren't able to discuss verbally at the last meeting. And we can just have a brief discussion about that, and we'll continue to use that to inform and refine the strategic direction, which hopefully will just get stronger with every refined approach. If you want to go to the next slide, please. And actually the slide after that. So this is going to be sort of impossible for you to read, but I'm sure you received it in your agenda packet. This is just a review of the kind of methodology we're using for the strategic directions. So we've put together a series of approaches which would lead to outcomes. So those are the if and then statements. If we do this and this, we will achieve this. And those several outcomes will lead to an objective being met, and everything will be under the umbrella of the goal of achieving a robust and inclusive regional economy. So I know in the first meeting, you went through a really great discussion of several of the approaches, but I was very interested in the feedback for approach 1.3. So if you go to the next slide, you can see an overview of the average rating by approach. Overall, I would say the ratings were fairly positive for each of the approaches, which is good to hear. That means we're on the right track. And I would like to, if we have time, touch a little bit on approaches 1.1 and 1.2, but I'm also happy to just discuss approach 1.3, which is on the next slide. I apologize, this is a very word-heavy slide, but this was how I was thinking through how we could refine the approach in this meeting today. So on the left is the original approach that we had sent out. If we develop and support the implementation of strategies for communities to increase their mix of housing options connected to transportation networks, and we increase implementer awareness of the benefits of improving the diversity and connectedness of the region's housing stock, then there will be greater diversity in housing choices that have access to jobs and economic opportunity. Some of the suggestions that we received in the written feedback were to explicitly name affordability and accessibility, be more explicit about TOD, add racially equitable to the approach, and add a little bit more specific language to second approach. So I put together just kind of a rough revised version based on that, which is highlighted in blue where I've made changes. But I was actually just curious to hear if folks had some more detailed thoughts on these approaches, especially because you didn't get a chance to discuss these in the meeting last time. So I wanted to know if these revised versions achieve what was suggested, or if there are ways that we could further strengthen them. I'd love to open it up to the group.
Hello, this is Obai with Equiticity. Some of these changes are a result of my feedback, and this does, it looks like you accepted all of my feedback, so it does, it looks good to me.
Okay, great. That's good to know. Thank you, Obai.
Alex, is Christy DeLaurentis, just a comment. You know, based on what Aaron indicated earlier about ADA accessibility, is there an opportunity here to be more explicit about, you know, constituencies that would be a priority for, and also aging community, you know, individuals aging within their communities. So just wondering if there can be a broader statement related to housing choices.
Well, that's an excellent point. Yes. I think being explicit about housing being ADA accessible, I think that's the accessibility piece, but that's a very good point about aging within communities. I don't think that had been noted before. Are there
Alex,
any other suggestions?
yeah, hi, Michael at the RTA. Kind of just building Christy on what you were saying with the accessible piece. That was also a little just not clear whether we're talking about, you know, accessible housing for folks with disabilities or older adults, or if we're talking about accessible to things or the transportation network, accessible to jobs. So maybe just kind of supporting a little clarification.
This is Tara Orban from Cook County. It's a good comment, Christy, just in terms of all ages and abilities, right? I think it would be become a stronger statement if we can kind of work on adding that in there. And just thinking of some of the work that I think MPC has done, right, in terms of, you know, the work on inclusive mobility kind of feeds into this.
Thank you, Tara. That's a good point. If there are no other comments on this approach, I'm going to make a few further tweaks and strengthen it based on some feedback you've given today. But I think this is already much stronger than the original approach, which is really excellent.
Hey, Alex, just I stand corrected. I looked it up. It's MPC has a report on universal mobility is what it's called.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
In that case, if you go to the next slide.
I have one more suggestion. This is Mike Myers.
Sure.
Anything about sustainability or environmental impacts that we can make in this statement as well?
Okay. I will work some more on these approaches with the team based on these suggestions and see if we can be more explicit about some of these things to make them stronger. So I appreciate it. Thank you. So the approach that actually got the lowest rating, I believe, was approach 1.2. I did not put together revised versions yet in this slide because we had actually gotten a lot of notes, but no explicit edits to the approaches. So I was just kind of curious to hear, since I wasn't quite sure who gave the different notes, how we could strengthen these if we could discuss it in the meeting, because I think this is incredibly important. The approaches will hopefully achieve the outcome of investment in freight-reliant traded industry clusters growing and having an impact on the community that will be mitigated by, I think, taking into consideration, the impacts of freight on surrounding communities, especially with an environmental justice lens. So I'm not sure who was giving the really detailed feedback on these approaches, but I'd kind of just love to open this up to discussion.
Hey, this is Kim. I think at the basic level, maybe defining the freight reliant industries for those that aren't familiar with what those are.
Kim, if it's helpful, I'm happy to pop in here too. So part of this builds on some of the work that our regional economy team, I'll say, our plan implementation team has been doing work on, and the freight reliant industries that are here across the region are, we have a lot of transportation logistics industries. We also have a lot of food and metals manufacturing industries that take advantage of our transportation, a multimodal transportation system. We also have a lot of like health and life sciences, and on the surface, that doesn't sound like it could be freight reliant. When you think about companies like Abbott and you think about AbbVie, they've got all these innovation labs, but they also have sort of tactical things that are moving and need to move around the network. Did I say, I might have not said food and beverage, which is also a pretty big industry here across our region. And I'm going to ask Austin if I'm forgetting anything.
No, I think there's sort of a range of manufacturing subsectors in the region. And I think one of the things that we've looked at in the past is the different freight mode use across different industries. So of course, sort of think of medical devices and pharmaceuticals are high value density, so a high price for a low volume. And so it's really more about truck movement to and from the air cargo hub at O'Hare, as opposed to some of the bulk movement that needs to happen closer to the port, across the south suburbs, into Will County, by freight, rail, as well as intermodal truck. So I think one of the tensions that we've always struggled with is that this has a major mover of our economy. The main engines of our economy still relate to goods production and goods movement, but that does come with trade-offs to nearby communities. And so as a region, we need to prioritize redevelopment near existing freight facilities so that we're taking advantage of our existing infrastructure, but at the same time, try to mitigate some of the effects on those environmental justice communities that live nearby. And I think that's one of the tensions that we want to try to convey through this approach, and think about ways that we can refine it so that we can continue to, again, take advantage of existing facilities while helping local communities thrive.
Thank you. And I was aware of that. I was thinking more for those that weren't in that, weren't as familiar with that, if you haven't done any direct work with
Sure.
land use and freight, particularly.
We did do a report before my time, I would say probably 9 years ago, looking at the nexus between freight and manufacturing and how those two broad sectors feed into each other, and digging into some of the data. But it would be good to update that and continue to see if our industry mix has evolved since then. Thank you, Kim.
Thanks, Austin. It looks like Christy has a question.
I have a question and a comment. Thank you. In terms of the original outcome, the statement is investment in freight reliant traded industries, and I'm questioning the need for traded. It sort of connotes a larger size, national or larger, and I'm not exactly sure that that's what you intended. So I'm questioning kind of what's the purpose of that word there. And then I want to just make a comment. Austin, you mentioned the maybe 2008, 2010, something like that, the freight, a study that was done that really focused on freight rail nexus. And this seems to be very truck focused, in my opinion. You know, there's no mention of rail. That was a big priority to try to use the existing infrastructure of the Chicagoland region. And so I'm wondering if there could be some nuance there that also that speaks to approaches to, you know, kind of following on those other strategies, which I think had been validated about use of freight rail, and then also recognizing the challenges of you know, e-commerce and all the trucking that's occurred since then. So can you just speak about the traded so I have better understanding of what the thinking there was?
I think traded just refers to export-oriented businesses, and you know, ideally it's sort of a globally competitive international trade, but it could also refer to trade across the Midwest or across the country. And I don't think it is trying to be indicative of sort of the scale of individual businesses. There are a lot of sort of, say, small, closely held metals manufacturers that still feed into that whole supply chain, that whole supply network that we want to sort of capture. I think it more reflects Cmap's focus on sort of asset-based, export-oriented growth, is thinking about how, while we want to support local community development and local businesses, we also want to sort of be thinking about at a systems level, how are we supporting robust dynamic industries? But I think we can clarify the language to make sure that it is more encompassing of the different kinds of products and services that we can be trading around the country. And I think, you know, related to that is that freight reliant industries are not just the goods producers and goods movers, but there's also, of course, the logistics, third-party logistics providers, the many other related service industries that go into it. And then as for the freight rail versus freight truck, I mean, I do think that the report, our previous report, was sort of reflective of the conversations that Cmap was having at the time. So there was a lot of focus on the CREATE program and how to untangle some of the freight holdups on the rail system in particular. And I think it would be a really great time to think about how we update that to reflect the growth of e-commerce and some of the intermodal truck delivery, large truck, as well as more towards the interior of the region, smaller distribution centers that are now also part of the conversation. So I think you're right. We did focus primarily on freight rail previously, but we can continue to refine that approach over time.
Tara, you had your hand up, but maybe not now.
Oh yeah, just kind of more broadly to build off of what Austin had said, I guess, and into Christie's comment, right? If we look at our region's infrastructure, we have 6 of the 7 Class 1 railroads. We've got 16 intermodal facilities. We've got the Port of Chicago. We've got 2 major airports, 10 interstate expressways. I mean, so like, I think the bottom line is, right, that we have access to national and global markets because of all of that concentrated here, right? And when we're talking about freight reliant like clusters, we're talking about all of that together using all of those different asset types, right? Okay.
Certainly, I think it's the mix of modes that is really unique to Chicago, I think.
Gotcha.
Michael?
Yes, as we you know, get more innovative and have these different technologies come out, like drone usage and things, I just want to make sure that any statement that we have is broad enough to be inclusive of future technologies, and because we're having problems with some of this infrastructure grant infrastructure language that excludes some of these new technologies, and you know, it's becoming an issue in trying to strategize on how to launch some of these test beds and things. So I just want to try to make sure that we are thinking about that.
That's a really helpful note, Mike. We've had other people ask us about air mobility before, particularly on this sort of drone delivery question. Traditionally, Cmap has said we work on everything up to the boundaries of airports, but we don't do airports themselves. And this is sort of blending those technologies and blending those infrastructure needs into thinking about other areas that would come under our purview and how they may fit into our infrastructure programs. And that's a new area of exploration for us. And I don't know if we have an answer for you yet, but it is something that we want to be looking at.
Thank you.
This is Obai with Equiticity. It would be helpful to reference our feedback that we shared online, because I'm trying to remember what I shared. I believe I said something to the effect of working with community-based organizations that are in the neighborhoods being impacted by freight-reliant industries, and ensuring that they're part of this process to develop strategies to mediate these things.
Another great suggestion, Obai. I don't know if you've been involved in our equitable engagement program. It has a new name now. I unfortunately don't recall it, but this is work that we are sort of trying to take holistically as an agency to think about how we can engage with community-based organizations so that they can participate in many of our public processes, and how we might be able to provide monetary honorarium to enable particularly some of the smaller neighborhood and community organizations to participate. And I'm hoping that that would certainly feed into any sort of freight related projects that we work on, thinking about how we can sort of make sure that the voices of those who are most impacted are actually incorporated into our planning efforts. But we can also call that out in these approaches separately.
Any other questions for Alex or Alex's cap? Okay.
Great. There was one more approach that we could discuss, but actually I would like to table that because it'll be better informed by the presentation you're about to receive. So perhaps we could just touch on that a little bit at your next meeting. So if you want to go ahead and skip that slide, move on to 4.2. I really appreciate all your feedback, and we'll definitely be incorporating more of this as we refine the language for our approaches and dive a little bit deeper at the staff level into how we can start achieving these outcomes. So thank you, I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Alex. I think you're learning as you listen to us and take our suggestions. We're just going to keep giving you more. So thank you very much for the work. It's good stuff. I believe our next item is Cmap's coordination of economic strategies, and we're going to start with a presentation by Austin and Tony.
Great, thanks, Bob. So as you've seen so far, a lot of our meetings so far have been focused on housekeeping for the committee. That was particularly our meeting back in March, and as well as continuing to workshop the strategic direction that Cmap exec is putting together. Moving forward, we're hoping to dig a little deeper into specific initiatives that are underway, not just here at Cmap, but across the region. And really thinking about how they all come together at, again, a systems level approach. And that requires some level setting because we have a range of expertise on the committee from economic and workforce development, housing, transportation, research, as well as a range of prior experience with Cmap. So today we want to update you on 3 projects focused on coordinating economic strategies. I don't want to dwell on the context for too long because I know a lot of this will be pretty repetitive for many of you, but this work is a direct outgrowth of On to 2050, which calls for a regional approach to economic development. We're really thinking about how to nest coordinated activities at the right level so they have the greatest reach and the greatest effectiveness. We found that some prior efforts on regional economic development have really fallen short. And while our economy has a global reach and a metropolitan breadth, too many of our strategies remain siloed or fail to reach all of the region's assets. So instead, again, we're thinking about coordinated strategies, working together to make sure that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So over the last few years, we've carved out an approach for ourselves that supports talent-driven growth, asset-based growth, export-oriented growth, inclusive growth, all sort of in a way that meets our expectations, particularly under the On to 2050 plan, but really leverages all of the assets that we were just discussing with the conversation around freight-reliant industries, but beyond that as well. And so we're talking about economic development as how do we improve the labor market? You know, what kind of systems level change is required to ensure prosperity for our workers through high quality jobs and better wages? I think it's helpful to define that up front because I found over the years that the idea of economic development, particularly at a local level, is sort of this magic bag. Anything can go into it and almost anything can come out of it. And so today, we don't necessarily want to talk about the local amenities, the quality of life issues, those community development objectives. We're going to try to cover those another time, particularly around disinvested communities. But today is thinking about those robust, dynamic industries that compete globally and support shared prosperity locally. Next slide, please. So I want to briefly go over 3 projects that we have underway to sort of think about how we can pick away at these issues. Northeastern Illinois has made multiple attempts at regional economic collaboration, and frankly, we've seen some mixed success and limited sustainability with those endeavors. So many of you will remember the Chicago Regional Growth Corporation that launched in 2018 and unfortunately folded during the pandemic. And before that, there was the 10-county Metro Economic Growth Alliance, or MEGA. And before that, there was Metropolis Strategies. So we've had multiple goes at this, and I'll try to point out how we're thinking differently with things this go around. But please interrupt me if you have any questions or thoughts. If nothing else, it gives me a chance to take a sip of coffee. Next slide, please. So starting off, the 7 county board chairs and the deputy mayor of Chicago asked for Cmap's help in setting up a process for thinking about these issues. This really sort of began to get rolling before the pandemic, but shortly after the pandemic began, it sort of got pulled into the recovery efforts. This led to a whole series of conversations with our partners, including the Chicago Community Trust, which ultimately invited us to submit a grant proposal and partner with the Brookings Institution on a new framework and action plan. And Brookings has been doing this work in regions around the country for several years now. So we really wanted them to bring that credibility, that experience, that expertise to Chicago. The aim here is to organize around very tangible, value-added joint activities. As I mentioned, we've had prior goes at this, and rather than focusing on setting up a new organization or thinking about how to institutionalize behavior, which is where I think a lot of those of us in government, that's where our mind tends to go. This project is focused on discrete, concrete functions of economic development that could be done better at a regional scale, where there's a business case for taking a regional approach, where we can have direct outcomes and metrics, and crucially, where we can gain the support of the private sector. Next slide, please. The project kicked off in November, and it's largely a coalition building exercise structured around 2 principal level convenings. You can see those across the top here. The team has engaged around 75 stakeholders to determine what are the objectives and the challenges that we feel like we can organize ourselves around as a coalition. Cmap has been convening the county level economic developers for many years now. So Lake County Partners, Choose DuPage, World Business Chicago, the Will County Center for Economic Development, and the Cook County Bureau for Economic Development. But the team also sought a broader set of perspectives, including corporate, government, and civic leaders. So this all led to our first major convening in March, and I think we were all pleased and frankly a little surprised at the amount of consensus we've heard about the project's approach so far. You know, this has been a goal for not just Cmap, but the region as a whole for a long time, and there's always been this, you know, sort of political gap that we weren't able to get over together. And so we've been really encouraged by what we've heard so far. That first convening produced a priority list of 5 activities that are now being developed into operational plans. So that lighter blue section in the middle. We will be bringing participants back together in July, hopefully to discuss and endorse those operational plans before moving forward with funding and execution later this summer and into the fall. Next slide, please. So the 5 activities are listed here. I won't go through them individually, but we'll make sure to post the slides after the meeting. I will say that they largely focus on, again, those core functions that could better leverage shared assets. So thinking about how we engage with the global investment community, how we sort of market or brand the region as a whole, or how we can sort of go in on joint RFI requests. Again, thinking about how we take advantage of all the region's assets and represent them well. And the idea is that we will ultimately want to sort of help economic developers from the very local neighborhood level all the way up to the state to better represent the region first and individual communities second. With this roadmap, we're continuing to engage partners on a lot of the details, trying to get down to those operational plans. So we're thinking about the program definitions, how existing efforts map into these activities from the various partners, as well as recommendations for scaling some of those existing efforts. Those operational plans will hopefully include a lot of details required to move forward with implementation. So not just a narrative around the rationale, but also the operational assignments and the budgets. Next, please. Finally, those operational plans will also include a fair amount of benchmarking. Again, we wanted to bring in Brookings to give us that national perspective and really frankly, international perspective by thinking about how some of our peers, larger and smaller, have similar programs underway, and also sort of relying on them to provide some of the associated costs, the staffing, the governance, the best practices that we might consider as we try to get these activities off the ground here in Chicago. So I'm happy to pause here and take any questions about the Brookings project in particular. I think I might have spotted one pop up in the chat. No? Maybe not.
Questions for Austin?
That is Obaye with Equiticity. Will you talk about the partners who are working with you all?
Sure. So it's the county board chairs, the county administrators, the county level economic developers. So again, some of those organizations I listed earlier, including World Business Chicago, Lake County Partners, Choose to Page, as well as the Kane and Kendall County governments, since they don't have their own economic development corporations. So a range of partners. I think what I will say is we want to do this in an inclusive way, a way that supports equitable growth. But at the moment, it is very institutional. And I think that's partly because we're trying to make sure that all of the partners are able to organize themselves and then take on strategies that support our equity goals. But it's not as representative as we would originally have liked it to be.
Yeah, I appreciate that that heads up on that. I wonder where you all are going with in terms of engaging with community-based organizations, especially at the neighborhood level, to ensure that they're part of this process and articulating what we see is needed for economic development.
That's a great question. There's not a plan for that just yet. I think we're trying to get the county level officials to cooperate with each other and sort of build that trust and that reciprocity across the region. This is looking at some of those conventional business development focuses, and we're trying to think about how those sort of conventional functions can be geared towards local community equitable growth. And that's something that we'll actually touch on in the next project as well, that I'll discuss.
Kendra?
Hi, yeah, I guess I had a similar question about, are you just focusing on mostly engaging government folks right now? And how are you thinking about the broader engagement, also with communities, but also with the private sector as well? Because I, had a chance to participate in some of the early learnings with Brookings as they were doing this work around regional indicators. And in some regions, a lot of this was really driven in part by the private sector. And I know, every region is different, but I'm just wondering how y'all are thinking about this.
Yes, that has been a crucial focus from the beginning of this project. I think some of the lessons learned from past attempts was that it was a little too government focused and there wasn't enough buy-in and support from corporate leaders. We are continuing to find that voice, to find those champions. We've certainly engaged the private sector board members, the investors in each of the economic development corporations, as well as the Cook County Council of Economic Advisors. I think it's an ongoing question for us. When we've talked to some of the, what I'll say intermediary organizations, what we've heard is that the corporate sector, the corporate leadership sort of across the region has a lot of demands on its attention right now. There's a lot of focus on violence and community justice. There's a lot of focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion within companies, and how to support sort of resilient, equitable hiring practices. And so far, sort of regional growth is not top of mind for many of the civic leaders. Now, I'll balance that by saying that we see in the data, and I think a lot of our other government partners continue to see in the data, that there are some underlying concerns that we need to be addressing to make sure that we are sort of sustaining prosperity for the long term. So it's partially on government to make the case for the business engagement that we know is going to be necessary, because we can look across the country at some of these peer organizations and the level of engagement that they have from their business community. We know that's going to be crucial for long-term success, but we just haven't gotten the kind of traction that we would want to so far. And we're hoping that some of the operational planning that we're putting forward is going to try to answer that need by saying, there's a moment here, we're in a funding environment where a lot of this work can get seed funding through various recovery dollars. Now's the time to try to take advantage of that and the goodwill and trust that we've built up through this engagement process to think about how we approach growth differently in the region. But like I said, an open question.
So at the end of the day, what is the deliverable you're hoping to get, with the funding? Is it to create some sort of shared regional indicator for growth, or for economic development, or for equitable economic development? I just want to be clear, because I'm not sure if I'm super clear on that.
Well, I think we would go back to those 5 functions. What are those activities that all of these economic developers know needs to happen, but is currently not being well served? So a lot of our export promotion, helping local businesses think about how to put forward an export plan, that was being covered by first World Business Chicago and then the Chicago Regional Growth Corporation, but has sort of languished since then. Is thinking about how we put forward a brand and a marketing campaign for the region to make sure that we're getting the kind of foreign direct investment that we want to be seeing. Is thinking about how to centralize a lot of the research and data support that these organizations rely on to be able to respond to RFIs and site selection consultants as they're sort of thinking about where to locate businesses. I think a lot of it is from Cmap's perspective is also thinking about the sort of higher order economic planning that we know needs to happen. Going back to, for example, the freight reliant industries, we know this is a major growth area for the region, and we want to continue to drive business development in that direction, but it's very dispersed. So a lot of the freight facilities are stretched across the region. A lot of the industries that utilize them are stretched across the region. And so how do we do sort of collective asset mapping to make sure that we're presenting the full picture for how we sort of take these industries forward for continued growth? And I will say that on the back to the question around inclusion and equity, there's a real interest among these partners to think about how they meet the moment on those questions. They're getting questions from their customers and investors around how they're going to respond to racial and economic equity. And they're trying to think about that not necessarily in ways that are standalone initiatives, but how they sort of fold equity and inclusion into their core mission. And so thinking about, now this is not particularly new to a lot of neighborhoods, say in the city or some of the closer suburbs, but there are other parts of the region that don't have a great deal of experience with this. And we're trying to think about how we can provide peer exchanges where some of the lessons learned, some of the models can be replicated in other parts of the region, and to extend some of those city-centered supports region-wide. So there's a range of topics, but we want to sort of not necessarily focus on the institutionalizing of these activities, but think about how we can get some initial momentum by getting joint investment in these activities across the economic developers. Okay, seeing none, I think we can move forward to the next project we wanted to discuss. So alongside the Brookings project, Cmap is also working with a national strategic planning firm, TIP Strategies. They're based in Austin, Texas, to develop a new actionable assessment of the region's economy. The goal is to inform a more sustainable and resilient model of growth coming out of the pandemic. I think to some of the points I was just making, we heard a recurring need for a better shared understanding of what the region's opportunities and challenges really are. And so from an analytical perspective, what should be the coalition's strategic priorities in terms of markets, sub-industries, or emerging technologies? So TIP is conducting an in-depth assessment of the region's competitive position and market opportunities, especially regarding high quality, accessible jobs. Again, the basic idea is that as the Brookings project carves out the functions and activities we can do better together, we need a data and industry-driven playbook on where to target all of that collective energy. So the project will draw on TIP's technical expertise as well as broad stakeholder engagement, hopefully some direct business intelligence as they go and talk with individual corporate leaders across the region. As you can imagine, there are a lot of considerations that should feed into that kind of recovery strategy, thinking about how we support traded clusters and the diverse industry mix, how we're identifying catalytic projects or investments, particularly those that benefit disadvantaged areas, or thinking about how we align talent pipeline with employees' current and future needs. So a lot of things feeding into that thought process. Next slide, please. So one of the ways that TIP is starting to get at some of these ideas is by developing a proprietary data tool for us that assesses the job quality and job access of different occupations. Not necessarily a new take on things, but trying to get a much deeper, richer data picture of what's going on in these occupations, and really focusing on industries that have a unique competitive advantage. So as our partners are thinking about how to dedicate their resources to these joint activities, how can we factor in the real benefits to workers, not just in a few elite high-tech occupations, but really in the major job groups in the core industries of our region. Since 2020, again, I think we've seen a real shift in the conversation around equity and inclusion as more of the economic developers are having to think about how to answer those questions from their investors and customers on racial and economic equity. And so we're hoping that we can sort of support a more robust approach of how that gets incorporated, not necessarily in standalone initiatives, but into the core mission, the core business case for these organizations throughout the region. So that might, again, include data products like this, but also thinking about how we can support peer exchanges or extending city-centric programs. Because we want to take advantage of that genuine interest and see if we can't push forward as best as we can in the intervening time. So I'm happy to answer questions around the TIP project in particular, but I know Tony Mano, my colleague here at Cmap, is also on the line and he's managing the project. So he should be able to answer any questions that I can't. Yes, Jonathan.
Yeah, Austin, I'm just curious, do you have a working definition of clean tech for the TIP project? Because I know at the state level in various places, trying to get a clear definition of what's meant by that term has been a struggle.
Yes, I think that is really, my understanding is that the TIP team is going to try to lean on the definition that MHub and the Clean Tech Coalition put forward in their proposal for the Build Back Regional Challenge. I think we've seen a lot of support for that. MHub has done really a remarkable job at sort of building that coalition. And I will say just real briefly that the 7 counties, both the county board chairs and the 7 economic development organizations, which is the county plus Old District Chicago, signed joint letters of support for the proposal, which doesn't sound like much, but compared to some of their previous attempts at joint activities, was really a good step forward for us for sort of instilling the practice of economic development region-wide. Shannon, I don't know if you had anything to add from MHub's perspective.
Totally. And thank you so much for helping to pull together that support. So Jonathan, we really leaned in on microgrid modernization, grid modernization. So clean tech in how it relates to the grid and transportation as kind of a through line. So that means there's certainly some projects in there to accelerate clean tech adjacent companies, but it's really about grid modernization.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think translating some of those project areas into occupational training is always
totally.
Also, I'd really be interested about how folks are defining that work.
Yeah, and one of the projects within that coalition proposal is really focused on workforce development. So it's assessing what the job categories are in the clean tech economy, and then also translating that into credentialed workforce training. So I'm happy to send more information offline if you're interested, but it's leveraging the Illinois Innovation Network as well.
Yeah, please do. We're working on the IAN side and working with the CJA funding programs there, so it'd be good to coordinate. Thanks, Shannon.
Perfect.
So this is Marissa Lewis. Is this, so the fact that it's a tip tool, is it strictly occupations related to transportation? Is that right? Yeah, even though there's 700 of them?
No, this would be sort of across what we would call our core industries. So there's industry clusters that are specialized here in the region. So it would be sort of a mix of certainly transportation related, but also manufacturing, professional services, finance, insurance, marketing, those sorts of industries.
So how many occupations are there? Because I assume you're using the standard code, and then I'm just wondering why not just do all of them? You know, like in case someone needs, if while you're at it, like pulling all the data together. I'm curious how much.
Sure.
Like, did you consider just kind of doing all the ONET codes?
I'm going to have to sort of plead my ignorance. I think there are 1,100. I
think so too.
Somewhere between 900 and 1,100 SOX codes in all. I think the part of the idea is that we wanted to get not just an occupational lens, but how to bridge the industry and occupations across each other. So as we think of the major occupations in the core industries, how are we sort of doing in terms of their job quality and job accessibility? So I think that the script that the team has put together probably could be easily extended to all of the other occupations that are not currently in scope, but we wanted to sort of get both the job quality and access, but also the scale of its, how important is this occupation to the overall performance of our advanced industries.
That's very exciting. And I didn't mean to say like, this is great, why not blow it up? But I was just curious.
Well,
yeah,
I'm glad to hear that it's helpful and that there's value in this information sort of for potentially all occupations.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments on the TIP work? Hearing none. Okay, I think we can push forward with the last project we wanted to focus on today. So this is really coming out of Cmap's planning staff. As I mentioned, we are continuing to drive towards systems level change, but we haven't forgotten about our roots. We're still heavily invested in all of the local activities required to make this possible, particularly here in Northeastern Illinois, where we know that municipalities really drive a lot of the work around economic and community development, and then within the city, a lot of the neighborhood organizations as well. So in this, the list of plan recommendations I shared at the top on 2050 calls on us to proactively coordinate local economic development efforts. And so Cmap is convening a group of local communities to talk about their use of local tax incentives and the potential to implement some best practices. I think this is a particularly good example about how Cmap can use its various strengths to structure a program of work on a given topic. This collaborative is building on 2 recent reports that Cmap published during the pandemic. I will try to drop a link real quick in the chat for those of you who are interested in reading either or both of these reports. The first at the far left is an in-depth analysis that tries to put comprehensive data and context around the use of incentives across the region, thinking in terms of the prevalence and distribution of different incentive tools. The second is a local guide for communities that provides principles and strategies and best practices that can help local officials think about how to improve their incentives for better effect. The collaborative is taking all of this work even further by working directly with communities to think about how they can leverage this information. Next slide, please. So I hope you'll forgive a little bit of log rolling. I'm really proud of the work we put together in both of these reports. So I won't stick with the data for too long. I know I have a habit of sort of droning on about it. But I do want to share a few statistics just to put things into context. Around 2/3 of the municipalities in our region currently use local incentives, particularly looking at sales tax rebates, property tax abatements, Cook County assessment classifications 6, 7, and 8, as well as Class C, and tax increment financing districts or TIF districts that we're all very familiar with. And this is all comes at substantial fiscal cost, even though academic research shows that incentives can be inefficient or ineffective depending on how they're used. Due to how things are reported, it's difficult to sum up incentive use in a single number, but we do know that around $17 billion of equalized assessed value, that's about 6% of the region's total property tax base, is dedicated to raising TIF revenue in one of 600 plus TIF districts across the region. We also know that around 9% of Cook County's commercial and industrial property, it's business property base, receives an incentive classification. And the region's 320 plus sales tax rebates could pay out more than $447 million if businesses meet all of their targets. So the numbers are big, essentially, and identifying ways to improve the use of local incentives is really critical to meeting some of our goals under the Beyond 2050 plan. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, Cmap's planning staff decided to make local incentives a focus of one of our community collaboratives. This is a newer program within Cmap. The community collaboratives are designed to leverage Cmap's role and expertise in convening stakeholders and generating knowledge for policy change. This program is an outgrowth of our larger capacity building program, which is funded by the MacArthur Foundation. I'll also add another link to the chat box for those of you who want to know more about our capacity building work. At its core, the community collaboratives are about four things: peer learning, collaborative decision-making, building trust among communities, and of course, building capacity within communities. And all of that with an eye towards policy change at a local level. So the project has two phases. It's currently in the first, what I'll call pre-work phase. The team has convened a group of peer communities, that is communities that aren't direct neighbors or competitors, but are similar in terms of size and industries and incentives use. And the goal is to have some frank peer-to-peer conversations around how incentives are being used and how it impacts these communities and their goals. They've also hosted discussions with industry experts about recent shifts in incentives use, both from a developer and a site selection perspective. And really it's all designed to test our logic for local collaboration and refine the approach of the collaborative ahead of phase 2. In that second phase, the team will repeat the process in a particular sub-region where neighboring communities may be vying over some of the same business investment. And eventually the goal is to achieve concrete policy steps like MOUs or non-compete agreements, or how communities might use a common scoring rubric for evaluating potential deals. So this is some really exciting work, again, sort of leveraging Cmap's prior policy research and data analysis, and thinking about how to engage individual communities in utilizing that information. Unfortunately, I was hoping that Kevin Kramer from Hoffman Estates or Jennifer Tamman from EY, both of whom have participated in the consortium so far, might be able to share some thoughts, but I don't think that either of them are on the call today. So again, I'll pause here if there are any questions, but I'm happy to put you in touch with the team who's leading the collaborative.
Obai with Equiticity. Will you mention the communities that you've identified for this collaborative?
Ooh, you're really testing my knowledge here, Obi. I think there's a mix of communities in the first phase of the collaborative. I know Hoffman Estates is there. I think Des Plaines is there. Tony, perhaps you remember some of the other communities?
Yep, Brookfield, Buffalo Grove, Lamont. I want to say Downers Grove, but I don't want to confuse the groves. Yeah.
So again, those are, the first phase is really focused on, I would frankly say, higher capacity communities that are not necessarily neighboring or competing with each other. And this is sort of thinking about not necessarily the outcomes, but again, sort of the process of how we put these community collaboratives together. Phase 2 is going to be much more focused on lower capacity communities that are in greater need of redevelopment, because then we can sort of hopefully apply the model of the collaborative in a really focused way.
All right. So you talked about this being a capacity building effort. However, the first phase is focused on high capacity communities. Those seem to be contradictory. So I just wonder how you think about that. And my second question I would love for you to talk through is, are you all compensating the communities for their participation?
Not in phase 1. I'm not sure if that's been discussed for phase 2. Again, we are in the process of launching our equitable engagement program, which is thinking about how to provide monetary honorariums for nonprofits and community-based organizations to participate in some of our planning processes. I know that, again, don't know if that's been applied to the collaborative yet, because we sort of have these 2 initiatives rolling at once. But I do think that we're trying to test the model of the collaborative in communities with the staffing to be able to provide some of these, and then think about how to extend that even further, provide the next bridge for our communities that do not have that level of staffing.
I think if I could pop in for a minute here too, I think one of the things that's unique about our agency is that our focus really is on the region. And so as we look at some of our higher capacity communities, that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have parts of their communities that either have low income households living there or a need for a mix of jobs, I'll say, right, where it's entry level pay, and how do you think about having the right mix of business, the right mix of housing, the right mix of transportation to ensure that you have sort of the economic opportunity and people aren't traveling very long distances to get to jobs for very low wages, right? So, I hope that you see in sort of this diverse array of work on regional economic activity across our region that we've got everything from sort of the big picture, like how can the region's counties work together on changing and aligning their policies so that they help support their local communities, to how can we help at the micro level on some of these issues and do things from both ends of the spectrum so that they're building towards our big goals in the 2050 plan. So it's a lot, even just hearing Austin walk through all of these projects. I mean, the theory and practice tool that he talked about before this, I think will be a great tool for our regional economic development organizations and our county economic development organizations to sort of look at their population that lives within their county and say, like, oh my gosh, we have this many people with this level of education and this many people with this level of education. Well, what types of industries require postgraduate education or just a certificate? And so then how can we help them think about what jobs they should be attracting and retaining and building on across our region too. So again, it's lots of different activities at lots of different scales, which is kind of, I guess, my point.
And I'll also add to that one of the other dynamics that we're trying to wrestle with through this first phase is that there are a number of communities who have pretty high capacity for economic and community development, but also face some very challenging market conditions. So I'm thinking, for example, of say Park Forest, which has a really great team and has a really developed idea of how they want to approach growth and what their goals are and how they want to use their tools, but are frankly facing some market conditions that are challenging. And so it's going to be not just the capacity question, but also the broader community characteristics and market conditions that we'll have to wrestle with. And I think that's part of why we want to sort of lean on peer-to-peer exchanges so that we can get some communities that have prior experience and can sort of use that to help each other.
I appreciate both of your additional context here. You know, part of my position is Cmap needs to do a much stronger, better job of operationalizing around racial equity and mobility justice, and that be reflected in your programming and projects. When I hear this particular project and I hear the cities that you listed, it just doesn't ring to me like there's a focus on racial equity there, because certainly there's some predominantly Black and brown suburbs and cities that I would think you would want to prioritize in phase one. So yeah, my position is just, I would love to see a stronger commitment to racial equity and mobility justice in all of your work across the board.
Great, I really appreciate that, Obey, and I hope you'll continue to push us in that direction.
Consider it done.
So I think to close out, as Aaron said, we have a lot of different projects underway, and these are just 3 that we wanted to highlight today, particularly as we continue to reformat if you go back one slide, Dominic, as we continue to think about how we want to utilize the reformatted committees. I think there's a bit of a balance to strike, and I know that committee members in the past have requested that they get a sort of a deeper look into projects earlier on in their development so they can provide direct feedback on the direction of how projects come together and what their goals are and what approach they take. But at the same time, we also want to be able to take not miss the forest for the trees and see how different projects come together into a program of work to advance the goals of the On 2050 plan. So I'm hoping that we've had some discussion today about how these 3 different projects fit together and how they can complement each other. But part of that is thinking about how we can use the different tools in Cmap's toolbox, or what we've described in the past as our implementation levers. So starting over in that sort of yellowish mustard color, can we convene stakeholders and build capacity to generate new knowledge that shapes how we disperse government funds, not just the transportation funds program by Cmap, but it's sort of across the board among our partners, and ultimately then reshape policy to meet some of the wicked challenges that we want to address through the plan. And I'm happy to stay on this screen as we have a bit of a discussion, or we have some discussion questions on the next slide. And I think not necessarily that we've already had a lot of great discussion, we don't necessarily need to extend it, but if there are any sort of higher level reactions to the program of work as a whole, we would love to hear them. Okay.
Austin,
Hearing none, I think we can move on to
Austin?
the next person. Yes.
Austin, I'm sorry, this is Kim. I did have a quick question. What's the mechanism for dispersing government funding? Through grants?
Well, for Cmap in particular, this has a lot to do with programming transportation dollars, but we also want to not focus solely on that, but also provide the data and information that might shape how other governing bodies distribute their funds, again, through programming or through grants as well. Okay, I think we can skip the next slide, Dominic, and move on to the next agenda item.
Great. Thank you, Austin, and thank you for all the terrific comments and input as well. And we're going to move on to other business at this point. Is there any new business to come before the committee? All right. Hearing none, I believe some members were going to share some organizational updates. I think I have a few queued up here as well. So I'm just going to call you out. And if I inappropriately call you out, just, you can do it next time if you don't want to do it this time. But I think first up I have Obai.
Yeah, I'll share a quick update about some work we're doing here in North Lawndale. So we are developing what we call the Go Hub, a community mobility center this came the vision for me came several years ago after learning about mobility hubs that exist in cities around the country, and is a popular concept in Europe, especially in Germany. And the idea for a mobility hub for the traditional model is that they hyper concentrate mobility devices adjacent to transit in a really tight geography. So all of these devices live outside on a parking lot or at an intersection and is right adjacent to transit. I thought that was pretty cool. And I thought about what does that model look like when the primary audience are Black and brown people living in a low to moderate income neighborhood with severe transportation inequities. And we did not believe that model alone would serve that primary audience. So we reimagined the model, and we came up with three components, three integrated components. One is hardware, which is the traditional model, hyper concentrating the devices together adjacent to transit. Two is software. So that's our community mobility rituals, a neighborhood focused advocacy coalition, and trauma-informed programming. And then the third is a physical building. So in our mobility justice in Chicago research, we did a series of focus groups targeting Black, brown, low to moderate income people living on the South and West Side. And one potent finding that came out of those focus groups is the degree to which Black and brown people have deep concerns about violence, and those concerns shape their mode choice. So given that, and I know what it means to be Black and live on the West Side of Chicago. I have a mom who lives on the South Side of Chicago. I have a lot of friends who have these same concerns. We did not believe that we could increase mobility without addressing trauma in our neighborhoods. Trauma and mobility are inextricably linked. The vast majority of violence, whether it's interpersonal, vehicular, or police, is during the act of mobility in our neighborhoods. It's while we're walking, biking, taking transit, or otherwise moving around our neighborhoods. So we felt a physical building was necessary to establish relationships, allow people to have some safe, protected time to begin to explore their trauma, have some healthcare professionals partner with us to take people through healing processes and trauma-informed programming so that they could begin to explore other modes of travel. So all of this is coalescing in the Go Hub here in North Lawndale, located at 19th and Pulaski. Our developer partner has purchased the property. We are negotiating lease terms and fundraising to rehab the building, and hopefully the building will open likely by next summer. We are starting to explore a minimum viable product at that site to launch this summer. It'll likely include an e-bike library housed in a couple of shipping containers on the lot adjacent to the building. We've already activated our community mobility rituals in North Lawndale as a part of the Go Hub. That's, as I mentioned, our software. That includes community bicycle rides, which are happening here weekly. Starting in June, it'll include a weekly walking tour series. And also in June, we'll start our monthly public transit excursion series, a group scooter roll series, and an open streets festival series. So all of those 5 rituals make up our community mobility rituals, all hyper-local in North Lawndale and attached to the Go Hub. We do have membership already for the Go Hub, and we'll be executing a membership drive. And based on those members, we'll activate a hyper-local advocacy coalition. So all of that work has started, and will be starting shortly. And that makes up our sort of minimum viable product to get something launched this summer, with the building potentially coming online by next summer. So this is our approach to not only increasing mobility here in North Lawndale, also helping to reduce violence, create jobs, and remove racialized transportation inequities at the neighborhood level.
That is great stuff. Thank you so much for sharing. It sounds like you're busy. Cool. Christy, I think you wanted to talk to us briefly about the Southplan Reactivation Act.
Yes, thanks for the opportunity. So SSMMA worked really hard over the last couple of years and successfully worked with the General Assembly on a piece of legislation that established a pilot program, or will establish a pilot program once signed into law. We're still waiting for the governor's signature. It's Senate Bill 3189, House Amendment 1, that establishes a pilot program for Southland municipalities to take their own tax exempt parcels and get them back on the tax rolls at a much lower rate. So we think this is a new tool for the South suburbs. And this was, again, proposed as a pilot in the South suburbs, although we heard General Assembly members say that, why only the South suburbs? Because these properties are tax exempt. So kind of building on Austin's premise about incentives and really the trade-offs, we saw this, and the General Assembly overwhelmingly, almost unanimously supported this, also understood that taking tax exempt parcels that are not able to come back on the tax rolls through any other tool makes sense to get them paying their fair share. And the goal for us was to accelerate transformational inclusive growth, get those tax exempt parcels, commercial and industrial, not residential, back on the tax rolls, because one of the things that we wanted to do was take our obsolete, languishing properties that have fallen off the tax rolls, used to contribute to property taxes, and in this initiative, bring jobs back to the community within this hard-hit Southland region. And what I would say is that this is only eligible for 6 townships in the South suburbs, and the incentive creates a 12-year inducement, but with regular, predictable increases year over year, so that it actually starts to climb back up, and by the 13th year is closer to real market value in terms of what the tax would be on those properties. And so this is a legislation is written as a non-renewable incentive because of the deep cuts that are initiated in the first couple of years on these parcels. And we see this as a tool that will be unique to the South suburbs and can help us transform some of the properties. It comes at no cost to the state, so there's no additional funds that are going into this. And one of the biggest things that we thought was important was to try to get new increment coming back onto the tax rolls, so that all taxpayers would begin to see a lessening tax burden and tax pressure within the South suburbs. Many of you know that we have the highest tax rates in our communities almost in the entire country. So this is a way to get at the tax rate challenge that we have, and bring again those obsolete, languishing, hard to encourage investment into these properties because of the the risk involved in those sites back onto the tax rolls. And one thing that the legislation does include is notification and reporting to both the General Assembly and to the other taxing districts. This was seen as a way so that they understood that these were tax exempt parcels. And so this concept of half a loaf is better than none would make sense, as opposed to thinking that they would be giving up any tax proceeds. Again, they're tax exempt, coming back on the tax rolls. So we await news that the governor is prepared to sign it. He has until June 26th to sign or veto. We don't anticipate that he's going to veto an important economic development redevelopment tool for the south suburbs. And so we're really optimistic that this will be a new tool in our toolkit, so to speak, starting early in July. So we're preparing for that. SSMMA is actually putting together a toolkit for our municipalities. We've had 3 or 4 workshops already just to make sure that they understand. We've invited the investor community contacts that we had so that they were thinking about, creative reuse and trying to create a buzz about some of these parcels. So within our toolkit, we're trying to make it simple, and this is all about the capacity building. I should say, in addition to municipalities, the Cook County Land Bank and the South Suburban Land Bank Development Authority can move forward with reactivation sites. They have to do it in conjunction with the member municipalities, or I'm calling them member municipalities, with my municipalities. And the idea here is that the land banks can add capacity to some of the communities that just really won't have the ability to navigate. Some of my communities don't have administrators, for example, let alone an economic development professional on staff. So we're creating a template sample resolution, the notification and form letters that have to go to the Cook County assessor and the Cook County clerk, notice to the other taxing bodies, and putting together worksheets that would provide sort of a roadmap. In addition to that, we're going to be SSMMA, because we're really focused on ensuring that that we have a success story to tell at the end of the 5 years, that we're actually moving the needle on some of the challenges that we have, both the blighted parcels that are within our community, but also relief of the tax burden and pressure over time as these new properties come up. We also want to attract jobs, the demographics of those jobs. So we're really putting a lot of thought behind this. In addition, I have 2 full-time GIS staff, and we're pulling together all of the data from the Cook County Assessor's Office on the tax exempt parcels, and we'll be having interactive maps that are up on our website. So both the development community and municipalities can use those. So stay tuned. We hope to have more updates as we go ahead, and just want to express support for all of the organizations. I know we had a lot of support slips as we navigated the General Assembly. Cook County President Preckwinkle and her team supported us, as did the Assessor's Office and other partners. So thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to share. What we see is good news, but I don't want to count my chickens before they hatch. We definitely need the governor to sign the law, and then we'll be off to a good start.
Great. Thank you, Chrissy, for your leadership on that and all of the great work with the SSMMA. Marissa, I think you have some exciting news to talk about with Chicago Works.
Yes, Marissa Lewis, hello. I am with the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership. And for those of you who don't know, we operate the publicly funded workforce development system here in Chicago and Cook County. And I had mentioned ahead of time that I wanted to talk about some new projects that we will get to do using ARPA funding, but I have one other thing I'd like to talk about first. Both of my updates today have to do with suburban Cook County. So I mentioned we serve both the city and suburban Cook, but these both happen to do with suburban Cook. And one of them is that tomorrow we are kicking off a series of what we're calling the Cook County Career Connector events. And these are we're doing this in partnership with Cook County, and these are events that promote an inclusive and equitable economy as Cook County emerges from the pandemic. And so these are essentially job fairs, but we're kind of pitching them as a bit more than that, because they really are about connecting Cook County residents with meaningful access to quality jobs, and then Cook County employers likewise to a skilled and diverse talent pool. And I mentioned they're kicking off tomorrow, and I don't know if I'm allowed to share, but I can put the kind of the list of them up if anyone's interested. But the one tomorrow, let's see if I can. Nope, I can't. Because you are sharing. The one tomorrow is at South Suburban in Harvey, And we're going to serve 300 job seekers. They're registered for this event in 25 businesses. And we are also doing that in partnership with the Housing Authority of Cook County. And then we have 5 additional ones that are planned for this summer all the way through to September, again, kind of dotted around suburban Cook County in areas of high need and where we have strong community partners. So we're very excited about that. And as this committee progresses, I will have, I'll be able to update all of you on how those have gone. We are doing, in addition to, in advance of each event, in addition to outreaching to candidates and to employers, like in a normal job fair, we are also doing candidate screening. So having our partner agencies close to where the event is being held, pre-screen candidates and review resumes. And then on the day of the event, doing kind of talent matching with businesses that have available jobs. So that is an update on an interesting and exciting program that we have getting started. The other update that I wanted to talk about, also related to suburban Cook County, is that we were awarded some Arpa funding. So BED led a process, the Bureau of Economic Development at Cook County led a process to accept proposals for Arpa funding. And we were awarded funding for 5 different initiatives. And they are a couple of them are for young adults. So we have, we're focusing on opportunity youth. So we have young adult year-round internships, as well as summer jobs. And both of these will serve about 200. So the year-round will serve about 200 young adults year-round. And then the summer jobs will serve about 200 young adults. We also have a project for returning residents. For 70 returning residents, and as in partnership with the county, we'll provide training and employment services to help people who have been incarcerated to support their effective transition home. So those are the first 3. And then we also have a few line items of funding to build capacity. So we run, as the operator of the public workforce development system, we don't provide the services directly. We provide the services through a network of 90 community-based organizations. And we will be able to use some of this ARPA funding to provide staff training, capacity building for these CBOs, improve our service infrastructure. We're creating a barrier reduction fund. A lot of folks, what's standing between them and accessing training or meaningful employment is that they face barriers that our funding isn't able to cover, because a lot of our funding is has very strict uses. And so we've been able to design, and we will soon be launching a barrier reduction fund for those involved in this programming. That's kind of really it. So this is all very new. We went through the application process. This was approved by the county board, I want to say just last week. So we're going to start pretty quickly rolling out some of this programming. And again, happy to come back to this group at a future meeting and let you know how some of those targeted programs for young adults and returning residents and CBOs have gone.
That's great. I have no doubt we'll take you up on that offer. Thank you, Marissa. Jonathan, anything going on at NIU?
Sure. Got a couple updates and some new projects that we're launching. So Education Systems Center at Northern Illinois University, or Ed Systems, which is a center that I lead, has been working closely at the state level with State Board of Education, Community College Board, Department of Commerce, et cetera, on pathways related efforts. And we have a few new initiatives which are launching with various districts and community colleges. So one is in partnership with the Illinois Manufacturers Association. We're launching a project called STAMP, or the Scaling Transformative Advanced Manufacturing Pathways. So this is with some recent DCO JTED funds, but we're going to be working with 9 regions across the state, primarily in Northern Illinois, including Chicago Public Schools, as well as some other suburban school districts, to build out manufacturing pathway programs, moving from secondary to post-secondary, and aligned to include high quality work-based learning within that, dual credit coursework, as well as the industry credentials for those programs. So as we launch this up, we hope to be supporting around 1,500 students in the high school manufacturing pathway programs over the 2 years of this grant. And we'll be, like I said, we'll be rolling that out. We actually have our kickoff meeting for that project later this week. We're also working, we received some Gates Foundation funding for work with Chicago Public Schools and city colleges, as well as District 214 in the northwest suburbs, along with some of their suburban college systems for an IT Pathways initiative. The IT Pathways program is going to be focusing on supporting students to earn up to 30 hours of early college coursework in IT credential areas that leads into high-paying jobs within computer programming and networking and cloud administrators, et cetera. That project is ramping up, and the work across these two communities, plus with the Belvedere School District in Rockford, we hope to be a model to scale out to many more communities over the coming years. The last thing I'll mention is that we worked with the Illinois Manufacturers Association partnership as well on House Bill 3296 this past legislative session. This has passed both chambers, the General Assembly, and is awaiting the governor's signature, which we hope will certainly be happening. But House Bill 3296 basically sets the expectation that all school districts around the state over the next 3 years will be implementing high-quality pathway systems, incorporating early college credit and work-based learning sequences in 2 or 3 areas that are aligned to local economic development goals and priorities. Kind of that the 2 or 3 depends on the size of the overall district. So we really think that with this legislation, it's going to move kind of a strong foundation of districts doing this work statewide to the overwhelming majority of districts statewide will be engaging in these types of pathways efforts. It also calls on the state to create a new employer champions program for employers that are working directly with districts on their career readiness and work-based learning programming. So this will have a pretty major impact on the pathways work statewide, and we'll be excited to support it.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. Gosh, everyone is doing such terrific and interesting work. Speaking of which, Tara, do you have an update for us?
Yes, hi, good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Tara Orban. I'm the Chief Engineer of the Project Development Bureau for the Cook County Department of Transportation and Highways. And first, I'd like to thank Cmap for just adding, this section to the agenda. It really is exciting to see how each committee member and their respective organization is working in just so many different areas to work towards improve this region's economy. So thank you. It's exciting. I look forward to these conversations to come. So for the purposes of my remarks here, again, we have such diversity in terms of, the committee. I'm coming from the transportation sector. So as we discussed earlier in today's meeting, we know that Cook County is at the center of the nation's transportation infrastructure with access points to, national and global markets. And the Chicago region's role really is the freight center of North America. It brings jobs and wages and sales revenue, but it also presents challenges of greater congestion, wear and tear on the roads and the rails, aging infrastructure. And also we touched on earlier, right, the need to adapt to a rapidly changing economy. Those are all, challenges that we have. So at Cook County, we recognize that our transportation system is one of our region's most important assets, but many communities are struggling to maintain it. So I guess 6 years ago now in 2017, under the leadership of President Preckwinkle, our department established an annual $8.5 million program to cover the costs of planning, engineering, and construction costs for transportation improvements sponsored by local governments. And it's called Invest in Cook. And so I know some of our partners here we've worked very closely with and are very familiar with this program. For others on the committee, you may not, and this might be the first time you're hearing about it. And the Invest in Cook program, it positions projects for future competitive funding opportunities, such as Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, Transportation Alternative Programs. And I know there was someone earlier in this discussion had asked about, funding opportunities, but the thing is, many federal funding programs require projects to have preliminary engineering complete before being eligible to apply. And these provisions make it difficult for lower capacity communities, such as those in South Cook County, to access the largest source of competitive transportation funding in the region. And that is what we at Cook County are interested in doing is providing that much needed resource, because municipal and township roads often provide direct access for, like on the, I'm giving a freight example, for direct access for trucks to intermodal terminals or industrial properties. And they link these businesses to major arterials, the expressway network, that whole system that we had talked about previously. But without, these first and last mile connections, the freight network would cease to function and Cook County's economy could suffer. So the municipalities responsible for these roads often lack the capacity and the resources to improve them for the standards necessary for truck traffic. And, in addition, because many of these local roads were built decades ago, they're not designed for the longer, wider, and taller trucks of today. And I have several examples. I know one of the things that was asked today was, no PowerPoints or anything, but please reach out to me if you're interested. We have lots of stories to tell and some examples that are already built. We've got, or that we're working on. We got 134th Street in Riverdale, Center Street in Harvey, 151st Street in Phoenix. 156th Street in Harvey is one example that was built a few years ago, and it's adjacent to LB Steel. And these local roadways serve as the shipping entrance, and the surfaces of these roadways got worn down to almost a dirt road, and the potholes were so large that trucks loaded with heavy steel products had to navigate carefully to prevent from tipping over. And that's how big these potholes would get. So the county, we secured $1.3 million to reconstruct the roadway. We contributed our motor fuel tax funds. And the hope here is that we can retain the firms, promote job growth, and leverage private investment within the region. So, so big to small, right? I gave you a small example, but we've also taken the lead on implementing transportation investments of regional significance that span multiple jurisdictions. And, one such example is in the Village of Justice, off of Interstate 294. There's a partial access interchange that we are working with the Village of Justice to convert to a full access interchange. So anyone who works in the transportation industry may or may not know the tollway only has a 50-50 cost sharing policy. They'll cover half, but you got to cover the other half. And that's where Cook County is working with local partners on off-system improvements adjacent to the interstates to help support, access to the interstate expressways, to support, the growth of freight in the region. So I hope you found that interesting and maybe you want to learn more, but I welcome any questions, on the program, and look forward again to hearing more from each of you as we move forward in future meetings.
Well, that's great, Tara. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you to everyone for sharing. Anything else on the member updates? Anything else? If not, I know we're starting to run out of time, so why don't we move on to the public comment section? Staff, do we have any comments received prior to today's meeting, or are there any other speakers to recognize in the chat box or elsewhere?
Good morning. We haven't received any public comment from email or in the chat box, but if there's anyone on the line who would like to speak, I think I see Garland.
Yes. Good morning. I'm Chair Tucker and everybody from Cmap. This is Garland Armstrong, formerly of Dispersing, now living in Des Moines, Iowa. And I just want to ask y'all, I hope y'all going to be doing something about the making sure to getting funding for, for bottles and cans and glass, because I remember way back in the 70s, they used to do it in the Chicagoland area when we got the glass bottles for the drinks, and we got refunds for it. And then when I was living in New York, they did the cans and the glass, and they kept up with the data, and they got a profit of it. And I wonder when will the Chicagoland area and the state of Illinois will be able to come up with a vending machine to make sure to have people get their refunds for their cans and plastic and glass, because here in Iowa, they're doing it like a 5 cents parts of it. And I wonder when will Illinois be able to be up and running to get their program started, because I haven't seen Illinois hasn't started their program yet on it since the in the 20th century in the 70s, but when will they be able to get it started so they can make sure to get some economic and keep up with the data with it? Because I think y'all need to get the refunds, which y'all need, and make sure to be on the tax roll for it.
Thank you, Garland. Thank you for joining us. Hope everything is well in Des Moines, my friend. Any other public comment? All right, hearing none, the next committee meeting doesn't meet until, believe it or not, September 26th at 9 a.m. So have a great summer. Apparently summer's going to get here this weekend, so that's good to hear. Is there any other business to come before the committee today? All right then, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Be well.
Take it easy, everybody.